I have always absolutely loved ghost stories. I'm all about UFO sightings, exorcisms, and demon manifestations. Having said that, I never really believed in any of it. I mean, it seems a little convenient that incidents only seem to appear to the same people over and over again. Meanwhile, I had yet to see anything, and not for a lack of trying. When I was 12, my best friend and I used to sneak into the woods by her house and try to scare ourselves. We only stopped doing it after a woman was murdered while taking her dog for a walk. I guess from then on, I always thought that the living was always far more dangerous than the dead. I stood by that. I mean, for the most part, it's true. In the village we live in, there's a rather large church. The local school holds assemblies and services there 4 times a week. I really didn't care much for that pile of rocks. The building had no heating and the benches were wooden and uncomfortable. The chaplain was a jerk. Not because he was a chaplain, I'm not that kind of person, but he was a jerk. He insisted the students didn't need cushions to sit on. Plus, his sermons had been boring me since I was in nursery. So, I didn't feel too bad about the circumstances that led to what happened a few months ago. It was Halloween, which happened to coincide with the last day of half-term. We had sat through the end-of-term speech from the headmistress, and my friends and I were feeling like a daring escapade to celebrate our upcoming week of freedom. That night, after taking my younger siblings trick-or-treating, I met up at my best friend's house for a mini Halloween party. There were 5 of us. My best friend Holly dressed as a witch, her boyfriend Matt as a skeleton, his mate Luke as a zombie, Phoebe as the chick from Pulp Fiction, and myself as a pirate. We had stolen some beers from our parents and were drinking them in her bedroom when I suggested we use a Ouija board. I know, not the most original teenage plot, but we were a little drunk, and I had bought one online ages ago and had been looking for an opportunity to use it. To up the stakes, Matt suggested we do it in the church. The building was creepy, with old dilapidated gravestones and eroding statues outside. Also, we knew it would be empty and quiet. I met them at the church after I ran home to grab the board. When I got there, they had brought some candles and Phoebe had grabbed a pepper shaker for some reason. The cold air had sobered me up, and as we walked through the church gates, I looked around at the gravestones. It had been raining earlier. The graves glinted in the moonlight eerily. The others were all giggling as they tripped over the cobblestone path. I had started to wonder if this was a good idea. Besides the breaking and entering, it did feel a little wrong to do this in a church. Wasn't one of the rules something about not playing in a graveyard? The door was somehow unlocked. Holly joked that the chaplain wanted to make sure the building was cold enough for the next service. We sat in a circle at the front by the altar. The stained glass window lit the floor in a mosaic of colors. For once, the place looked kind of beautiful, if I'm honest. The buffoonery of my friends quickly reverberated around the stone walls as we began lighting tea lights around the board. Eventually, we all settled down and finished our beers, being careful to put them back in the bag in case we had to bail suddenly. Phoebe agreed to say the weird psychobabble to start our seance. We all went quiet. If there's anybody here, please show us a sign. Use the board to communicate. We're here to listen. It wasn't the official opening or whatever. She was completely making it up. But we all seemed to feel the room get more tense as we all placed our fingers on the planchette. Phoebe nodded toward Luke, who was opposite her, to ask a question. He snickered as he asked, "Does anybody want to play?" The group all made audible sounds of apprehension as they waited for the planchette to move, except me. I felt a spasm of cold shoot down my back, and I shivered slightly. I felt unnerved and weird. The planchette remained still. Holly was next. She thought for a moment and asked, "Is there someone here who wants to tell us something?" Again, nothing happened. Phoebe suggested we move the planchette in figure eights to charge up the board. I thought it was probably nonsense, just a ploy to get people to move the board so the psychosomatic reflex would kick in. Matt then said, "Scare us, I dare you." At this point, most people would probably roll their eyes at the story. Idiots, right? We were asking for trouble, and I would definitely agree. But I truly didn't think anything would happen when I did it. Plenty of people use Ouija boards, and they fake pranks, and being haunted in movies are made and stories are written. But who actually has a personal experience with a Ouija board? It's always a friend of a friend, right? And I stand by the fact that most people have legitimately not had a real experience. I don't know what did it. The fact it was Halloween, it was midnight, it was on sacred ground by a graveyard, the figure eights, did some Googling later, or that we messed up the chant, or we were too jovial. But all I know is that what happened next is the single most terrifying thing I have experienced in my entire life. I felt my heart rate shoot up. I could hear it in my chest as the figure eights of the planchette seemed to slow down. The planchette drifted to the yes on the board. No laughter now. I exhaled and watched my breath float above me. The others stared. They all began blowing air jokingly, but mine was the only one that formed thin clouds. The planchette felt hot as I asked my question, "Where are you?" We all watched as it spelled an H. We all muttered it wasn't us, or that the other person should cut it out. I still can't be sure. Maybe it was one of the others. Honestly, in the wider scheme of events, it doesn't matter. The planchette went on to spell E, then R, then E. "Here," Phoebe said. The planchette suddenly stopped. We went silent. I felt something start to, "Here!" We all jumped as a loud male voice echoed from the other side of the church. It was like a growl. It traveled down the aisle like a shockwave, echoing around the room as it passed. Holly and Phoebe screamed and backed away from the board. Matt and Luke swore before jumping up. Luke yelled, "Who's there?" thinking the chaplain was playing a cruel joke. Matt was more concerned it was an intruder and began shining a torch accusingly. Phoebe was petrified and staring into the dark, wild-eyed. Holly gained control of herself, then looked at me. "Are you okay?" I remained where I was, my fingers still glued to the planchette. I was shaking slightly. "I can't move," I whispered. Holly lifted my hand off the planchette. My hand instantly reacted and pulled itself back. "That's not funny," Holly responded. "I'm not messing with you," I replied. I was tense. I felt my muscles being clenched by something outside my body. I was paralyzed in the position. Luke was still searching the church with Matt. Phoebe came over and asked me the same questions Holly had. The pair was trying not to freak out while trying to get me to move away from the planchette. I couldn't spend more than a split second out of the sitting position with my finger on the planchette. Somewhere from the back of the church, Luke yelled, "The door's locked!" Matt ran back to the altar to figure out what was wrong with me. I was trying to communicate that I could see something outside the window to the left of the church, but I couldn't speak. The words just weren't coming out. I felt like I couldn't form a coherent phrase. I sounded like I was having a stroke or something. I could see a woman outside. She was young, pale, and had a horrible injury on her head. I watched her walk past the window twice in the same direction, then walk toward the window. She was standing there glaring at us. I felt tears roll down my face as I tried to scream. My friends looked at me, horrified by the terror on my face, before Phoebe finally looked behind her after what felt like hours. They all panicked upon seeing her. I watched as the woman snapped her fingers and all the candles went out. I imagined my friends leaving me there. Holly instead held on to me. "Don't look at her, okay? Look at me. Listen, it's not her." I looked at her and nodded my head as much as I could. I couldn't stop imagining the woman who was killed in the woods when we were younger. Just days before, we had walked the route she had. Her missing poster was everywhere before they found her. Her description of clothing worn was exact in every detail. Holly kept speaking to me, trying to calm me down. Then the woman disappeared. The door swung open with a prolonged creak. My back was to the door, but I could hear my friends freaking out. A figure was walking down the aisle. Its footsteps were heavy. Holly held my face in her hands as she focused. "You need to move now. You have to do this. You've got to snap out of it. I won't leave you, but we are both in trouble unless you move." I felt my eyes roll back in my head as I tried to move, pain shooting through my body as I tried to rebel. I only heard the next events. An invisible man was walking down the aisle, muttering violent acts as his footsteps fell one after the other. Holly continued to talk to me, growing in hysteria. Eventually, Luke grabbed the planchette from my hands and stepped on it, crushing it. Phoebe followed suit and snapped the board in half. I felt whatever was forcing me to stay still let go, and I turned around just as the footsteps seemed to stop a meter before me. Finally, an ear-piercing scream shot through the dark from the back of the church. It was a blood-curdling cry of a woman in desperate fear. The invisible man became visible for a second before disappearing. He stood there with a manic gaze, blood all over him. We all recognized him at once. The candles flickered back into life. The echoes of the scream ceased. We all stood for a second, taking everything in. Without further hesitation, we all ran out of the church back to Holly's house, leaving the Ouija board and candles. We all lay there in our sleeping bags in the living room. We said nothing to each other, but no one slept. We all agreed never to say anything about what happened. A level of normalcy resumed for all the others, but I don't go out much these days. There were never any announcements about the Ouija board being found by anyone. After everything, I feel like I should go to the police. I just don't know how I'm going to relay what I saw without sounding completely insane.